All right, ladies and gentlemen, our speakers are ready. So let's roll on to the next panel discussion. So again, the topic is what it means to be the top maritime technology city. The session will be using the online interactive Q&A platform, Pigeonhole. So again, we're going to flash that on screen for you to scan the QR code and place in the passcode, which is SMW 2022. So that's pigeonhole.at, or you can go to pigeonholelive.com also. So ladies and gentlemen, I know that it's after lunch, but please, let's welcome our moderator and speakers. And first and foremost, let's welcome our session moderator. He is Chua Chye, founder, ShipsFocus. Let's give him a big hand, please. Is our moderator joining us soon? Okay. So they'll be joining us in a while. Okay, and next, let's give a big hand to welcome Thomas Ting, Chief Technology Officer, Deputy Director, Innovation, Technology and Talent Development Division, Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Let's welcome Thomas, please. Thank you for your applause, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, Thomas. And joining them, let's welcome Nidhi Gupta, co-founder and CEO, Portcast. Let's welcome Nidhi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And we have two more panelists, and let's welcome Ronny Waage, Regional Manager, ScanReach and Digital Transformation Committee Member, Singapore Shipping Association. Welcome, Ronny. Welcome. Thank you. And last but not least, let's welcome Chris Chung, Director, Digital Innovation and Strategic Projects, Wärtsilä. Let's welcome Chris, please. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand to welcome our panel, please. And panel, you can remove your mask to make yourself comfortable. We have safe distance. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for staying on for this session. Today, we're going to talk about cities, specifically Maritime Technology City. For the 5th year running, Singapore has emerged top leading maritime cities of the world. And in the recent report by DNV, Menon, Leading World's Maritime City 2022, Singapore retains the top position. And out of this, maritime technology is one of the key factor and the top position. So today we want to have a panel to talk about why we have maintained this position and how we are going to keep searching on. And we have gathered a very diverse speakers representing our ecosystem. And I'm going to let all these speakers to first introduce themselves. Can we start with Thomas?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm the CTO of MPA and responsible for ecosystems development as well as some of the digital transformation program. Nice to meet all of you.
Nidhi?
Hi, I'm Nidhi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Portcast. We're a logistics tech startup based in Singapore, but working with global shippers and logistics companies to predict how cargo moves across the world. Glad to be here.
Ronny, go ahead.
Thank you, Chye. My name is Ronny Waage. I am the regional manager in Singapore and APAC for ScanReach. We have developed the world's first onboard wireless connectivity solution for the maritime industry, becoming an enabler for better data, for better decision making for the world's operators and owners of tonnage. I'm also a member of the Digital Transformation Committee of the Singapore Shipping Association, as well as a board member of the Norwegian Business Association here in Singapore. Glad to be here.
Very good. How about Chris? Can you give us your intro?
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Chung, Director for Digital Innovation and Strategic Projects. So I work for a company called Vatsala, and we have been doing quite a lot of work in Singapore, but also regionally and globally as well, which I'll deep dive into a little bit in terms of perspectives around maritime technology and Singapore as a city and its secret sources as well.
Fantastic, thank you. My name is Chye. I work for ShipsFocus, a maritime dedicated venture studio based in Singapore. And I would like to start asking the question for maybe Thomas. Can you tell us from MPA's perspective or MPA's aspiration for Singapore and also your strategies to be a maritime technology cluster, and what are the plans you have, for example?
Okay, I'll be happy to share a bit on that. So in terms of MPA's ambition, I think probably you have seen in some of the press release, we want to be the leading maritime technology hub of the world by 2025. But of course, in the latest Menon report, they have put us as a #1 maritime technology. We are encouraged and humbled by that, but I think there's a lot more to be done because I think we are probably having strengths in the certain niche area. But if you look at the entire maritime and innovation landscape, actually there are a lot of many different areas of technology we're talking about. So in the space of digital, I think we've done pretty well. In terms of some of the deep tech and hardware developments, I think there are still a fair bit to be done. In the areas of decarbonization, that's where I think Singapore can make a big and huge difference in the coming years, and we are already forming collaborations, coalitions, consortiums to look into the various opportunities. So in this ambition to be the leading maritime technology hub of the world, besides the ranking, we actually put some numbers behind it. We have been supporting about 30 over startups, maritime tech companies in the past in terms of funding, but in terms of the number of startups that we have actually accelerated and helped them to blend into the ecosystems, probably about 70 to 80. Not a huge number, but I think that is a good start for just a few years that we have started the Peers and One program. And in probably 4 years' time, we're going to grow this number to 150. So we're looking to grow at least another 120 maritime technology startups, whether is it Singapore local or is it overseas. We want to bring them here, bring the entrepreneurs, the talent to be here to serve the maritime community and to co-create solutions. So that's the kind of ambition that we have. And together with this, we also have to, of course, look at the different elements, how to create an enabling environment for the startups to thrive. So our strategies revolve a lot about creating the environment to attract the talent and the companies and the startups to thrive in Singapore. For example, we created a lot of regulatory sandbox because a lot of all these frontier innovations often get into the problems of the regulations, either by Ministry of Transport, Aviation. I mean, talking about drones, we set up the Maritime Drones Estate for experimentations and all that. So we set up a lot of these kind of regulatory enablers across the different agencies just to make sure that the startups, when they do innovations, they don't hit into a lot of problems, provide them some guidelines. The other aspects, of course, to a lot of digital startups are the data. We want to make the data available to these startups to validate their solutions. Without data, nothing much can be done about AI, and you can talk about all the optimization algorithms, but without the willingness of the corporates to give the data, nothing much can be done. So MPA starts by having our maritime data hub, creating a lot of APIs for a start. We are trying to talk to a lot of companies to share with them the industry problems, their partners' problems in accessing some of their data. So hopefully by making available some of these data, they are actually enabling their customers and helping themselves. And some of this data, if we put in a proper governance process, the startups can actually benefit, including the researchers can benefit from it. And I would say the other part of the strategies is about working with the maritime companies to look into open innovation, because I must say still quite a number of them focus a lot on in-house innovation, but how to work with startups, how to work with researchers, at the same time protect intellectual property, but yet you can find something to co-create with external providers. And in this whole journey, we're trying to tell the companies actually there's a lot of benefits to them because they get free training for their employees. You form a circle of digital officers and bring along their colleagues. They get into design thinking training. They get into a lot of, so these are all free training for their employees, which is great for them, in terms of innovation. And in the end, they either get new solutions, they find a new co-creation, new venture or business opportunity that they never had before. And all the more, they also get a free technology scan in this whole exercise, because if you were to go and do your own technology scan, you're going to spend quite a fair bit of resources on that. But these startups, all the scans, are providing a lot of information to the companies. So these are the ways which you increase the willingness, the propensity of companies to co-create and work with startups. And probably I'll save some time for the rest later. Yeah.
Fantastic. Actually, to be coming at the top Maritime Technology City for first time may be lucky, but 5 times, I think it takes more than 101 things right. And hearing from Thomas, I think there is a very comprehensive approach to getting things done, and that I feel very, very heartened and assured. This leads me to Nidhi. Nidhi works for a startup called Portcast. You were match made by Singapore Innovate and EF. Why did you choose to come here in Singapore, and what is your experience since? Can you share with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't expect that question, but I have been in Singapore now for, I think, over 15 years. I came here to work for DHL, which is one of the largest logistics companies in the world. With my computer science and business background, I got to work in a management consulting setup, and then got to understand the logistics industry, what customers want. I did business development and strategy roles for them. And I think through that, I realized that there's a lot of opportunity. The industry is still quite traditional. It's still quite manual. A lot of the technologies we were talking about, like control tower solutions, we had a certain limit of the revenue threshold that we could target because it was still fairly manual at the back end. There were teams of people who were doing manual data entry to get the technology to actually work. And that's why only large manufacturers, large shippers could actually afford it. But on the same page, other industries, especially if you look at fintech or some of the other sectors, the technology has evolved so rapidly. So I saw that as an opportunity. We could bring the artificial intelligence, cloud computing, data analytics, all of those technologies, which are best in class, used globally across these leading sectors, into maritime and logistics. And I thought that's kind of really exciting. That's what I wanted to create. And EF and SG Innovate gave the right platform to help do that and help start that idea. But also, I think Singapore has been the perfect breeding ground for that. Just from how much support we get from the different parts of the ecosystem, be it from the government or regulatory perspective, to funding and VCs, to corporates who have regional headquarters here, to talent, getting some of the smartest tech talent is actually possible in a country like Singapore. And having it as the top port in the world, it just is the perfect breeding ground to start such a company. So
amazing,
yeah.
Amazing how you see the challenges, but you identify the gaps and then make your startup worthwhile here. Fantastic. I'm going to come to you, Ronny. You represent ScanReach, and ScanReach set up its Asia Pacific office here in Singapore. Why did ScanReach pick Singapore as the maritime technology setup from Europe?
Thanks for that question. Probably touch upon a couple of things there. We're definitely not the first Norwegian company in the maritime industry to set up shop in Singapore, and quite surely not the last. But I think it is clear that Singapore does have a very strong position as a maritime hub, which makes it particularly attractive. So for us, being a small technology company headquartered in Norway, when we set up our first overseas office, our natural first step out in the world beyond Europe, which we can also cover from our headquarter, is to set up in Singapore, because we can reach all of Asia Pacific from here. We're in the right time zone, et cetera, like all the clear factors. But also here is you have immediate access to a lot of the industry. The maritime sector here has developed a lot over the last years, as has the space for technology. Also access to funding and multiple other factors that come into play that makes Singapore particularly attractive. I'm probably also the only one on stage who has spent almost the same amount of time working in Oslo, which was on top of the list for maritime technology in the Menon report the first 5 times until this year, and now also spent the last 7 years in Singapore. Norway's had a strong space in technology related to maritime and has a very long maritime history. Singapore has really done a lot in this space that I've seen in my time here over the last 7 years, building up to then overtaking Oslo, so to speak, on top of also the technology part of the Menon ranking in 2022.
Thank you. Having heard the views from the 2 startups, I'm going to come to you, Chris. You represent MNC. So from an MNC or Wärtsilä's perspective, what sets Singapore apart, and how does it all matter to Wärtsilä?
Thank you, Chye. I think firstly, I really want to take the opportunity to congratulate, I think, all the top maritime cities. Singapore, definitely one of them. Oslo, Busan, London, Shanghai, because I think over the last 2 years especially, a lot of these cities really rise to the occasion and really advance both digitalization and green technology at the same time. I think what sets Singapore apart, I think I would like to start with the notion of actually a very clear articulation of strategy and what Singapore as a maritime nation, where it wants to get to. As you've, Kenneth sort of alluded, there's a lot of activities, but it's very much underpinned by a very strong set of strategies, roadmaps, and very actionable milestone that is then supported by a very strong concerted effort around R&D and a lot of activities. And for that reason, actually, it's very compelling. It structures a very conducive environment. And here we are, we've got lots of people, lots of really great faces, a lot of international people coming in. And really, it's about the nature of the collaboration that sets it apart, in my opinion. I think from a Wärtsilä perspective, look, I think like many MNCs, we of course compete for a competitive edge, but at the same time, we also need to collaborate for a lot of common problems and common industry issues. And again, Singapore's strong ecosystem, the fact that you have a whole value chain right from a very supportive regulative framework, sandboxes to test things out, to actually a lot of class societies are very well presented here. Insurance companies, legal, technology providers, customers, means that you have the ability to bring all these ingredients into one melting pot. And again, it's not necessarily easy in other cities as well. So again, that's something that is a little bit unique and different. For Wärtsilä, we have a number of ongoing partnerships with both the Maritime and Port Authority, as well as a number of research organizations over here as well. Some of the things that we do, certainly, that again, we find very, very conducive is when we talk about decarbonization, the fact that there's a very strong drive, and Singapore certainly takes climate change very seriously, but also around the whole notion of enabling decarbonization through digitalization. Sorry, a bit of a long buzzword there, but things like, for example, doing just-in-time, ship-to-shore integration of data flow to optimize the entire thing. A autonomous vessels, autonomous systems, safety assurance. Those are a lot of the areas that we find, actually it's extremely conducive to do it in Singapore and, of course around the world as well, but certainly in Singapore we've got a special spot for it.
Great insights, Chris. How to complement competition and collaboration within the ecosystem, and also having very clear strategy with a vision to go. And as Thomas has earlier laid out MPA's ambition and the strategies. I'm going to come to you again, Thomas. Can you tell us any specific initiatives or programs that the MarineTech startups or investors can look forward to in the near term, even this or next year, for example?
Yeah, I must say there is no fixed formula in terms of how we're going to push these as a innovation ecosystems. Every year we are reviewing how we are actually shaping up the triangle. So this triangle, I'm talking about the maritime companies, the startups and the investors and the accelerator community. How do we do better with each one of them? At the center of this thing is actually the innovation part. And for now, our observation is that we have quite a fair bit of small startups in Singapore. We have quite a fair bit of the big companies. In fact, a lot. The demand drivers are huge here, which is why the reasons they are the magnets pulling in the startups. But we kind of have a bit of the gaps in between in terms of the medium-sized companies, the scale-ups, the gazelle. Of course, I don't think we've seen a unicorn in Singapore yet. So I think this is a important focus for us, how to help the startups to grow to the next phase. We can't guarantee all of them will be successful, as you know, the failure rates of startups. But how do we create a journey such that they can eventually become scale-ups? Next year, in fact, this year, we are looking at some kind of a programs to help the scale-ups. I think we'll announce some, not just funding schemes, but also some kind of a scale-up immersion program where we, together with companies, we bring them to overseas to gain exposure to the overseas markets.
If I may interrupt you there, you talk about getting more scale-ups. Obviously, the scale-ups have to come from the startups. So what do you think are the gaps that we need to cover at this point?
Yeah, I think quite a number of startups, they cannot sustain, and the fundamental issue I feel is that the scalability of the innovation and the problem statements they're looking at has to be very robust at the first instance.
Okay.
So if you're looking at the wrong wrong opportunity and the wrong problem statements, the ability to scale that particular solution is going to be quite limited. So that's a very important step, which we are working across different companies and trying to validate that particular problem statements and that innovation opportunities. What is the kind of a Singapore market size, global market size we're talking about? So once that opportunity is scalable, then I think the possibility of going to the scale-ups is important. Second step is, of course, the investors have to come in if they don't have the financing resources, and we are looking at specific schemes this year to bring in educating the investors who are not into the maritime space, and also creating matchmaking opportunity, group buy opportunities, discovery opportunities for them to help these scale-ups to get the investment that they want.
That is why this is a startup and VC track. So we have to bring both of them together. How about your experience, Nidhi? Are you facing any kind of challenges scaling up, or are you already at that stage that Thomas described as the medium size?
I think we're still a bit of a journey to go to get there. So I think it's as much about the company and the startup which starts as it is about where you start. So, the city has a role, the ecosystem has a role, but there's a bigger role that the startup in itself has to play. And it comes down to, having the right problem statement, like Thomas said, targeting the right set of customers, but then it's also about having the right team and talent in place who's driving that, that strategy forward, that vision forward, and being able to create a company that's truly global. Sort of like SG says, creating a company from Singapore for the world, especially because we're talking about international trade. We're talking about Singapore market size in itself, just from a domestic perspective, not being the global, expansion ambition that a startup can have. It has to be sort of global from day one in terms of ambition. So for us as a company, there are a couple of things that are the top challenges. One is talent. With what we've seen in terms of restrictions and talent movement, people working more remotely, of course, talent has been a top of mind issue. And that's one of the major things we're trying to figure out from multiple aspects. I think, Singapore has had various programs that have been quite supportive in this regard. For example, the SG United program. But companies like ours have to constantly figure out how to get the right talent from anywhere in the world to help build the company in the right direction. So that's the first thing. The second is in terms of the product market fit. So, being able to reach a stage where you're doing the same thing over and over again and winning the same type of customers in a standard process, kind of like a flywheel. And as soon as you have that, as soon as you have the commercial circle defined and it's working, that's when that circle can be replicated in any country, any region in the world, and can be handed over to anyone who can come in and really expand and propagate that forward. And that's when it starts getting into that scale-up mode. So that's kind of been, I believe we're in that cusp of doing that. We're getting things right, but we want to make it a real playbook in order to become that true scale-up.
We shall be looking forward to a podcast, scaling up soon.
Fingers crossed.
Ronny, are you facing the similar kind of issues, or there are any other barriers you think we have to overcome to reach the scale-up position that Thomas mentioned?
I think there are multiple factors that come into play when you talk about this. When you're targeting a B2B space with your solutions, then you need more patience and it takes more time, and often that also means it takes more capital because you need to survive longer than your typical B2C startup before you actually get any scale on what you're trying to achieve. Now, as a company, we are in a sort of fairly good position to scale, as we recently closed our Series A funding round at the beginning of this year. So we're well capitalized and are in the process of scaling. But getting from that first step to the next step is something that, at least also for us, took a lot longer than I think initially expected. Both the development of the solutions and getting the product market fit right, and also getting the right talent with you along the way, et cetera, all of these factors. Now, I think there are a couple of key factors. I mean, one is capital. Now, we have good supportive investors, and we have raised our capital round from the existing investors that we already had with us, which meant that we didn't need to sort of chase funding as much. But that is a challenge, and historically it has been a challenge because capital has not really been targeting or looking at this space, at least not sort of venture capital or risk-taking capital. That's changing. Singapore's done a phenomenal job there. I must say, I mean, Singapore has made itself and ensured that Singapore is the most attractive place in Asia to set up a venture capital firm and to make investments in venture capital or into startups that are backed by venture capital. So that's one point. Singapore is already doing quite well there.
So we are quite contributed in terms of startup fundings. There are various kind of schemes to fund production of solution or startups, having some solution to help them grow the solution and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think one example, of course, is the Seeds Capital Maritime Fund that was set up a few years ago that gave 6 venture capital firms selected access to co-investments from Seeds Capital, which, of course, again, is backed by the Singapore government, specifically targeting the maritime space. I know when it comes to broader logistics, of course, you have Reef Knot Ventures, which is a fund where Temasek Holding and Kuehne+Nagel are the 2 main investors. So Temasek, being a part of Singapore, indirectly at least a part of Singapore government, comes in as a direct investor into scale-ups because they invest sort of $5 million plus into companies. So there is that scheme, and that has been done towards other industries. This does help drive it. But I think if you look at Singapore today as compared to 10 years ago when I was here first at NUS working for a startup here in Singapore, that's 12 years ago now, there was hardly a single venture capital firm in Singapore. Now there's at least 150 VCs that are present here and actively present in Singapore, investing in the entire region, but Singapore is the hub for all of that. Maritime is a bit behind. I think it was mentioned on one of the presentations earlier today that the space now looks similar to what fintech did in 2010 to 2013, so we're kind of 10 years behind that. But we're now finally getting a lot more attention. It's coming from broader logistics and supply chain, and it's trickling down also to more maritime-specific applications. So I think it is developing. It's just, again, back to the patience part. It needs a bit of time. It's guiding the attention now, and you won't have any scale-ups until, if you need startups first that then scale. So you got to start from scratch. And we're finally now seeing companies such as Portcast and others in Singapore that have raised several $1 million, are moving towards Series A funding rounds. Quincus is another one, which recently raised quite a good round of capital and are scaling internationally from Singapore. So it is developing. It's just taken some time, but it's been built sort of step by step. But we're finally getting there from the capital point of view.
Nidhi, what is your next funding round? When is it?
Well, I think we have, I think one of our investors just sitting
you got
here.
enough, you got enough money.
I think we have enough runway. However, in the team internally, we are thinking of being more aggressive because ultimately, like I said, it's an international market. When we look at international trade and what we do as a company, the boundaries are endless. We've been getting a lot of customers from the European and the US markets. So it's really about positioning the company at a global scale, internationalization.
So what if a VC comes to you and said that, look here, Nidhi, I like your solution. If money is not an object, how are you going to scale?
Money is an object. I mean, so what we could do if we raised earlier is be more aggressive, be more international, reach those positions of being a scale-up and even much faster, and basically get more market share and position ourselves globally. So it is an option. It is something we constantly are thinking about internally. And we may do it not because we have a pressure of the runway, but because there is an opportunity. And the opportunity is now. Okay. What we see in terms of the industry, in terms of maritime tech, with all the disruptions that have happened, we had been knocking on customers' doors, and the last 2 years, customers have been knocking on our doors. And it's a great place to be in, but it means that there's an urgency of executing now. And that can happen if we have the right backing from the right investors and corporates and partners. So, what I think we could think about from an investment perspective or VC perspective for Singapore in general, not just about our company, is the US investors or the international investors taking a bigger bet, putting in larger check sizes.
So we need more confidence from the VCs community here, taking a bigger bet.
Yeah, there are still a lot of the VCs, which are the US VCs, they have a percentage of their funds which they can deploy outside of the US. So Singapore has a good chance of that, but that proportion hopefully can increase, and we can see a lot bigger checks coming into Singapore, which would be sort of, it's kind of linear with the kind of startups becoming scale-ups, checks becoming bigger, more VC funds starting to be based here. So I think we're going to see that.
We only need a good success story to come, right? Chris, do you have any inputs in this perspective from Watsila? Or are you able to share with us your success story?
Perhaps, and you're referring more to the startup sort of scene?
Yes. So, for example, to help startups scale up, so that they don't remain at the startup level, but at the medium-sized level.
Yep.
And that's where we need to get there, and then the money will come, or the money will earn the investment returns, and then more money, that will attract more money to come. So how do we get into that virtuous cycle from Wärtsilä? Is Wärtsilä has any part to play in this, for example?
Yep. So maybe I'll come from it more from a personal perspective as well, because I've been mentoring a number of startups and certainly being part of the panel for some of the startup accelerators.
Absolutely, yes.
I think it's fantastic, just as pointed out, just a few years ago, there weren't that many startups in the maritime industry. There's a lot of fintech startups, of course, e-commerce startups, etc. But I do see the change coming. Especially with Pier 71, with a lot of the work that US has put in, you're starting to see more and more technology companies and founders looking at this industry and looking at the opportunity to scale, to your point. Now, where I see a gap is a lot of times you've got some great people, great technology, but the maritime industry compared to maybe land-based or other type of industries, also one where it's not so much about conservatism, but if you're talking about, for example, smart vessels, you're talking about smart ports. In addition to technology, I think there's a much larger emphasis on safety, security, the ability to implement and test it and make sure it can roll out, not just in Singapore, but globally. You need to be able to work with the people, and the people is actually quite diverse across the value chain. So it depends on what type of startups we're talking about. If we're talking about the ones with hardware, software, people, change processes, they do struggle a little bit initially, and really it's getting them the space and allowing them to nurture and actually really prove the value and prove the concepts. But on the other side, I do see actually the availability of data to be also a game changer. Now again, what to me sets out Singapore a little bit, by no means just Singapore, but certainly for Singapore, the Maritime Data Hub, if you look at the digital port, TradeX, if you look at digital oceans, OceanX, there's so much concerted effort to actually enable data sets to the startup community. Now that I think is also a potential for game changer, not just on the ship side and the port side, but also on the logistical side as well. So I think that's one to watch out for too.
Great. Because of the time constraint, I'm going to throw a last question. And this is open to all of you. What do we need to do to help us, Singapore, retain this lead that we have? Any one of you, Ronny, I see you held up your mic.
No, I have one point there that at least I've experienced over the time that I've been in Singapore is one that is ever more important, and that is to almost return to our old ways of how we approach talent. When I moved to Singapore, I came here on a tourist pass. I spoke to a few companies, got a job offer. They sorted out my EP in a week over the week of Christmas, and I started the week after working. It was super simple and very straightforward, and very easy. The process today has become a lot more complicated, a lot more time-consuming, and a lot more complex, and with a much lower probability of you actually securing that employment pass.
Okay, so we got to improve on that process of getting new
over the course
talent.
of 7 years, it has changed drastically in how it's experienced today versus how it was just a few years ago.
Gotcha.
At the same time, the global war for talent has increased. The flexibility of location for where you work has changed drastically. Everyone's fighting for talent. There's a massive shortage of the right tech talent and the experienced tech people. There's a massive shortage of good salespeople, good BD people all over the world.
Ronny, any
so
specific
if you're going to remain
suggestion,
attractive,
specific suggestion for us to overcome that
exactly.
issue?
No, I'm getting to the point of that. So the specific suggestion is to remain attractive, you have to make it as easy as possible for someone. If someone is on the other side of the world and they're willing to relocate to Singapore to work from here and drive a scale-up or something from Singapore, they should be able to move here and start tomorrow. We have to make it as easy as possible to get good talent in, because talent is a global competition. We cannot afford, as a nation, as Singapore, to close our doors to talent.
I think
it is essential that we remain
as I
open to talent.
understand,
That's one of the
Singapore
key
is
factors.
one of the easiest places to get, yourself in.
It was,
here. Yeah.
in my experience, yes. But it has changed over the last few years, unfortunately. Okay. But that is one of the things that I believe that we, as Singapore, should reverse and go back to ensuring that we remain open and attractive to talent.
All right, we take note of that. Thomas, do you have any contribution to the last question?
Yeah, I think quite a fair bit have been said on the talent. I think it's a very crucial piece in terms of providing the capabilities to startups and companies, and already we are working with various education and research institutions trying to get a fair share of the talent into this industry, and a lot is about educating them about the maritime and port industries, and which is already undergoing a massive transformation in terms of the job nature. It's no longer just all the dangerous and laborious work. There's a lot of innovation and digital is also involved. So it's something that we have to continue to educate the students and the industries, the opportunities. The other areas we have to focus a bit is in terms of the R&D investment that we have put in, and how to put all this R&D investment into translating into outcomes for the industries, including translating into startups for their use to become deep tech companies. And I think even companies like yours and Nidhi, you work with research institutions like A-Stars and the IHLs to kind of develop the algorithm. So you don't have to develop everything internally, and hopefully you can have all talents that you want, but you also work with the researchers to kind of develop some of these deep tech. And I would say the last part would be this triangle that I talk about. We have to constantly build the virtuous cycle where the startups find success in Singapore. The corporates actually find the kind of return by collaborating with startups. They get actually solutions, they get new business opportunities, they solve some of the operational problems. They see the returns in both the near term and the longer term. So I think this is important. You need to build that virtuous circles to build the confidence, which otherwise they will walk away the subsequent years. And finally, the investors who invested in some of these startups, hopefully they get good returns out of some of these investment as well. I think it's important to build that virtuous cycle every year continuously.
Sounds like we have a lot to do in terms of talent attraction, talent development, improving on our R&D, and also enhancing the investment environment. This was a great session. I think there is some Q&A.
Yes,
Ning,
there's
do we have any kind of questions?
Yes, there's 3 questions, Saipo.
Okay.
Can the team flash the questions on the screen? Are you able to see? The screen right in front of you, actually. When I pass the iPad to you. Give me a second.
Maybe Ning, you can read out the questions.
I'll read it out for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question, maybe the first one, I'm not sure whether the context will be sufficient. What's the key strategy your organization would adopt or has adopted to ride this wave of change / opportunities?
Any one of you? Chris? Or Thomas?
I think that's a very open question in terms of what you mean by kind of ride this wave of change and opportunity. Certainly, if you look at decarbonization, it's a very big opportunity, but also a very big change that require everyone to sort of come together. Of course, Vatsala as a company, decarbonization, getting to zero is absolutely in our heart and our DNA and everything that we do. So that's one part. In terms of the other opportunities, for example, we talked about smart connected ports and connected ships, and hey, Singapore's a fantastic place regionally to do that. Of course, collaborating again with global players, because there's no point creating a technology just in Singapore and it doesn't work everywhere else. And again, on that aspect, I have to, pay compliments to the port authorities. Last night, actually, I was at the Nordic Maritime event, and actually, you've got a number of the ports around the world and a number of the Nordic countries coming together with Singapore. And those are the things that is really quite key for a company like Wärtsilä to be able to work with an international community in Singapore, but also globally as well.
Fantastic. Thomas, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, it's a very broad question, depending on which angle you're coming from. Maybe not for the industry, but just for MPA, at least we focus a lot on our internal digital transformation as well. I mean, it's difficult to advocate other people to transform if we ourselves don't transform. So starting with individual, we have to think a bit differently about how we deal with things, and then look at some of the processes that we can actually streamline and digitalize. And in terms of the transactions, today, of course, a lot of humans go to the websites and mobile phones and try to complete some of these transactions. But actually, a lot of these things can be done automatically backend through API strategy. So API development is a major development in MPA. We're trying to expose as many of our applications to internal systems through APIs, but also to customers through APIs. And you have to put around a data governance and kind of IP strategies around that to safeguard your intellectual property and data. So that's, again, another important aspects of our digital transformation strategy for just the organization.
That's very encouraging, leading by example.
Yes, there seems to be some new questions streaming in with more votes, so maybe I can field some of those.
You can, please.
This one suddenly became quite popular. Currently, the number of maritime VCs is small compared to general VCs. How can we broaden the appeal maritime tech startups? How can we broaden the appeal maritime tech startups to the broader VC community? Do we understand the question?
How about Nidhi? I see this is very suitable for you.
Yeah, I am actually a little bit biased that I don't think it necessarily needs to be maritime VCs that a tech startup needs to approach, even if you're working within the maritime space. Ultimately, if the business makes sense, if there is value to be generated, if there are customers who are interested, and the company creates value, it should be relevant to the broader VC community. So it's really about also for a startup, what you need from the VCs, like besides the capital, what can they bring in? Are we looking for doors to be opened for customers? Are we looking for partners who understand how to bring the startup to a scale up and a gazelle and a unicorn? Like, what are we actually looking for? So I actually think as long as the business fundamentals make sense, value creation is happening for the customers, the references from customers is working, and you're showing traction, the startup should be appealing to the broader VC community. It then comes down to how much promotion, how much how much we're reaching out to those broader VC communities. How do we get access to those people?
So there's some more reaching out to do.
Yeah.
Ronny, how can we attract VCs into the maritime startups?
I actually just wanted to comment briefly on that as well. I think there are two factors here. One is if you have a good solution and a good team, if you're investable, you will get investment. And it shouldn't have to be a maritime VC or non-maritime VC or generalist VC. I mean, one thing is broadening the understanding of the industry to the broader venture capital community, which I think is already happening because maritime becomes a part of supply chain and broader logistics, which is getting ever more attention in this space. That is one factor. I think another factor is, as we have experienced as well, and we have raised both venture capital and, as ScanReach, we raised both venture capital and industry capital, and that is that a lot of the solutions that we need and that companies are working to develop for the maritime industry are not scalable to the point they will attract venture capital investment, or are not developing quickly enough maybe to attract venture capital investment, at least which is historically not so patient, which means that you should also seek out industry capital because it tends to be more patient, or a mix of venture and industry capital might be a better mix or a better investment mix for you as someone who's raising funds. So there's that factor as well, which I think is very important. When you look at broader supply chain, it is ultimately much more scalable than if you look at shipping as a standalone industry. And in there lies a bit of how you target your approach to raising funds for the solution or technology solution that you're working on developing.
Personally, I'm not so sure about that. I think just within the maritime commons itself, there are a lot of scalability, except that it is not in the same kind of quantum, but the value can be very, very substantial as well. You imagine in terms of the number of ships, it may be 70,000 only, but in terms of number of shipments, voyages that a ship conducts over 25-year lifespan, for example. So there can be a lot of scalability. So the startups just need to find the right business model. Can we have the third or last question so that we can kind of round up after that?
Sure. This one shot up in popularity again. In the Silicon Valley, talent knows that if their startup fails, they can just move to a big tech company or another startup. This safety line seems missing in maritime. How could this be changed in Singapore?
Interesting question. As far as I'm concerned, you have to fail in order to succeed. I haven't found anybody who succeeded having without failed. So, but any one of you, please.
I don't think that safety line would be missing. So first of all, when you're working for a tech company or a startup, one should not think about what's going to be my safety net, because then you're not invested in it, you're not believing in it, you don't agree with the mission, you're kind of looking at a plan B. I would suggest that, if someone's entering that tech company or a startup, one really believes that you're creating something. Whether it works or not, there can be multiple aspects for it. So that's the first thing. Secondly, even if it doesn't work, I personally worked for in a corporate for a decade, and I've been running a startup only for about 4 years. The learning curve is massive. The kind of things that you learn and how you evolve as an individual, not just in terms of the deep technical skills, but in terms of running a business or working with other people, it's just massive. It's not something, the bureaucracy is just so much less. You can make change happen. And this is just general feedback that we've been getting within our team and generally in the community. So I really don't believe that you can't actually then work for another company. The skill sets would be so replicable and so much in demand. We have constantly people kind of trying to poach our people. So I think there is no downside to working for a startup.
No downside. Heard that? No downside. Just take that step. It's still safe out there.
Chye, maybe I can...
The worst thing that happens is you have to do something else if it fails.
Exactly. Chris, you have something to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, I have met a number of... I know a number of really amazing startups in Singapore and around the world. And one thing that you find with a lot of these talents is the passion and the curiosity. And they're amazing people. So this is an interesting question. I would actually challenge that a little bit and say, actually, even for a lot of big companies, including Wärtsilä, we absolutely welcome talent and diversity from all around. We have, of course, a lot of engineers, but you know what? We complement that with a lot of broad-based skill sets. We certainly do see amazing startups and passionate people. Welcome aboard. Please reach out if that's the case. But I would say, actually, at least from my experience, a lot of the startups that I've seen, including in Singapore, amazing, very passionate people.
Fantastic. I'm going to take that as the last word from this panel. I want to thank the great panelists. Thank you all for joining us in this fantastic topic, what it means to be a top maritime technology city. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Let's give a big hand to Mr. Chua and our distinguished panelists. Thank you very much. And thank you for your questions as well. It was very interesting to see them stream in as we were doing the Q&A. So thank you. We'd like to invite you back to your seats.